10 Worst Countries for Climate Change. Many of the extreme weather events linked to global warming aren't selective with regards to a nation's income or GDP. We saw this in 2021 with deadly floods in Europe, as well as record-breaking floods in China, and a combination of extreme winter temperatures and hurricanes in the United States. Many organizations charged with ranking the countries most affected by climate change top their lists with countries like Japan and Germany. Yet higher-income countries generally have more resources to deal with the unavoidable impacts of climate change. Low-income countries do not. Here is our breakdown of 10 countries hit hardest by the climate crisis. Afghanistan. Between 1950 and 2010, the temperatures in Afghanistan increased by 1.8 degrees centigrade, and an optimistic view of the climate crisis in the country still shows a minimum increase of 1.4 degrees centigrade by 2050. Rains have decreased by 40% in the country, and the World Food Programme classifies both rainfall-related drought and snowmelt-related drought, owing to the same warming conditions in the Hindu Kush Mountains, affecting Pakistan to the same effect as current threats. The WFP also points to flooding in other areas due to both heavy spring rainfalls and riverine floods caused by increasing snowmelt. The capital of Kabul and its surrounding regions, which produce much of the country's agricultural yields, are hit especially hard by both drought and flooding, which has increased the threat of hunger. Bangladesh. Coastal communities and island nations are among those facing the highest risks associated with the climate crisis due to rising sea levels. Much like the Philippines, Bangladesh has been fighting the effects of climate change for decades, leaving it number 7 on Germanwatch's Climate Risk Index, CRI, for cumulative risk between 2000 and 2019. In this time, the country experienced 185 extreme weather events that cost a combined total of $3.72 billion. These emergencies affect nearly everyone in the country. According to a 2018 USAID report, 89% of Bangladeshis, approximately 143 million, live in high or very high climate exposure areas. This could cause 1 out of every 7 people in Bangladesh to be displaced from their homes. Chad. Chad currently ranks last on Notre Dame's Global Adaptation Initiative Index, which also categorizes it as the 4th most vulnerable country to climate change and the 2nd least prepared country for its effects. Over the last 50 years, increasing temperatures, droughts and use has caused 90% of the country's largest lake, Lake Chad, to disappear, rendering it a dust bowl. Haiti. In 2019, when former Prime Minister Joseph Joula was the country's environment minister, he compared the climate crisis to violence in his country. Climate change is a very big terror in Haiti. It's very hard for us to deal with climate change. An ongoing humanitarian crisis in Haiti, along with its high levels of poverty, is partly to blame. The World Bank estimates that Haiti has lost 98% of its forests, making the country even more vulnerable to complex emergencies when they strike. Kenya. Kenya ranks slightly higher than other low-income countries on the Global Adaptation Initiative Index. However, this doesn't mean that the consequences of the climate crisis are any less dire, especially in areas like the northwestern region of Turkana. This area of Kenya is being hit hard as part of a larger drought in the Horn of Africa, the area's worst in 40 years. For this reason, as well as the losses that have come with that drought, in 2019 alone, drought was estimated to cost Kenya more than $708 million. Germanwatch ranked it among the top countries most affected by climate change in its 2020 Climate Risk Index. Malawi. Malawi, along with Mozambique and Zimbabwe, was at the epicenter of 2019 Cyclone Idai, the costliest and deadliest tropical cyclone in the region's history. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called it one of the worst weather-related catastrophes in the history of Africa, and overall, Idai affected 3 million people, killed over 1,000, and caused $2.2 billion in damages. Niger. Over 80% of Nigerians rely on agriculture for their livelihoods, a prospect that has become increasingly risky as the country faces temperatures increasing at 1.5 times the speed as the rest of the world. By the end of this century, climate experts predict an increase of 3 degrees to 6 degrees centigrade, which will have devastating impacts on the Sahel region. Already vulnerable to hunger, water scarcity, and violence, Niger could face even further stress and crisis if the current climate crisis continues at pace. Pakistan. Just below Bangladesh on the CRI for cumulative risk is Pakistan, which Germanwatch ranks as the 8th most climate vulnerable country in the world. Last July, temperatures in the Sindh province city of Jacobabad, which New York Times author Fatima Bhutto called the hottest city in Asia, if not the world, exceeded 126 degrees Fahrenheit, too severe for human tolerance. The World Bank calls Karachi, another city in Sindh, a climate hotspot, estimating an increase in climate events and their impact on the city's 14.9 million residents. Somalia. For the last several decades, a cycle of crisis in Somalia has severely compromised the country's ability to cope with one of the main threats it currently faces: climate change. Along with Kenya and Ethiopia, Somalia is currently facing the effects of the worst drought to hit the Horn of Africa in 40 years, with some regions of the country at high risk of famine due to the fallout. Over 60% of Somalis are pastoralists, meaning that their ability to survive depends on consistent enough rains to keep their flocks healthy and well fed. Over the last decade, this has become an increasingly harder goal to meet. The same is true for Somalia's farmers, whose businesses contribute to 65% of the country's GDP. Sudan. In 2016, climate scientist Jose Lilivald told CNN that parts of North Africa would, at some point in this century, become uninhabitable due to increasing temperatures. One of the counties most at risk, he noted, was Sudan. A 2019 report ranked it as one of the top 10 countries most affected by climate change, and the most recent data from Notre Dame places the country as the sixth most at risk, based on both its vulnerability and capacity to respond.